Hi, and welcome to Flaawsome Talk, the podcast. This is my very first episode, and if you don't know me from YouTube, I am an entertainment reporter, and I've been really dragged into the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni legal drama. So I've been talking a lot about that for the last 6 months on my YouTube channel. Now I am launching this podcast, which is going to be a bit longer segment. So if you are on any of the major platforms, you can listen to me there, or you can watch me on YouTube under my podcasts. Anyways, I just wanted to give you a little introduction about myself first, if you don't know me. So I moved to New York from Oslo, Norway in 2007, basically because I was so into Sex and the City. I loved the show so much. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a fun lifestyle. I want to live in New York as well. So I moved there and I worked as a reporter and a freelance journalist. I was always looking for good stories. I would write anything, from lifestyle, fashion stories. I did more investigating stories. I worked for all the bigger newspapers and magazines in Norway. And then one day I was asked if I could interview Samuel L. Jackson for a movie called Jumper. Which was a terrible movie, by the way. But anyways, it was my first so-called junket interview, and it was my first introduction to that world. I was terrible at my job. I forgot to bring my tape recorder. It was so embarrassing, but Samuel L. Jackson was the sweetest guy. He was so nice to me. It was just me and him in this hotel room for over 20 minutes, which rarely happens now. These interviews are so short. And I didn't, as I said, I forgot to bring my recorder. So I had to get a note from the hotel, and I was writing everything down with my pen. It was terrible. Yeah, I probably did every mistake possible in the book. But I did learn from that. And so next time I did not forget to bring my tape recorder. Anyways, then I started getting these celebrity interviews. And my first big TV interview was with Lady Gaga. I remember I was so nervous, and I was sitting in this hotel lobby on the Upper East Side in New York, waiting for her. And she was, I think, 4 hours late. And I was sitting there by myself, peeing myself, thinking, oh my God, how is this going to end? That interview actually turned out really well. And I was so excited to see it when it was going to air on television in Norway. But then, to my biggest disappointment, when I watched the show, they had removed me from the interview. And they removed my byline, which is terrible, which never should happen. And of course, I was devastated. I was like, no one knew that I interviewed Lady Gaga. And and I contacted them and I said, why don't I have a byline here? And they were like, sorry, we only give bylines to the people that are working here full time. And I was like, wow. That's not very nice. But after that, I continued working for them, and I started selling these type of interviews to different newspapers as well. And I got a lot of access after a while. So I've been interviewing hundreds, maybe 1,000 celebrities over the years, and most of them have been really pleasant experiences. Some of them have not, and maybe I've talked more about that on my YouTube channel than I've talked about the good ones. But there are some amazing stars out there. And I think for me, my experience has been that the older and the more established the actor or actress is, the nicer they are. And I think maybe sometimes when a celebrity is getting a bit older, they're not so afraid to speak their mind. They're not so afraid of questions that are politically incorrect or not being politically correct themselves. Yeah, so that's my experience. Mostly that, that the older, more established actors are the nicest ones. If I'm going to mention some, it would be Michael Douglas, Jane Fonda, Diane Keaton, Meryl Streep too. She can be a little intimidating, but at the same time, she's just like no BS, which I really like. You know who she is. You know where you have her. The younger ones, I would say that Amanda Seyfried and Tom Holland are my favorites. And if I'm going to mention some that I don't like, that I had bad experiences with, I have to say Michael Fassbender, Gordon Joseph Levitt, and Brie Larson. Christoph Waltz, although he did give me an interview that was good, he's very pretentious and very intimidating. Also, I had a bad experience with Anne Hathaway. If you followed that on my YouTube channel, you saw that she actually reached out to me and apologized this fall for being kind of rude in that interview. So I really appreciated that. And of course, we have to talk about my interview with Blake Lively and Parker Posey that I posted in August on my YouTube channel. And what happened after that was a crazy roller coaster ride. So I had interviewed Blake Lively back in 2016 for a movie called Cafe Society. It was directed by Woody Allen, and I was going to interview Blake Lively and Parker Posey. They were appeared at the Crosby Hotel in New York. I think it was in spring, maybe March, around March in New York. And I'd never met her before, and I was kind of excited to meet her. I didn't have a specific opinion about her at that time. And I sat down, and the interview started like this. First of all, congrats on your little bump.
Congrats on your little bump.
What about my bump?
You've got two nice ones.
And they are kind of bumps, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know what that was. People have been trying to analyze it, if she was actually trying to fat shame me or if she was trying to say that, oh, you're pregnant too, which obviously I wasn't. And then it went downhill from there when I started talking or asking about what it was like wearing those costumes that were so beautiful in the movie. Did you guys love wearing those kind of clothes that you got to wear?
Yes. And working in digital.
Everyone wants to talk about the clothes, but I wonder if they would ask the men about the clothes.
I would. Yeah, from there it went downhill and they were ignoring me for the rest of the interview. And I think that's what made people react so strongly when they watched this, because she comes off as a mean girl. And the reason why I've talked about that a lot in the press as well, the reason why I didn't share that interview back in 2016 was because I knew that if I showed this side of her back then when I was in the middle of my career, interviewing celebrities several times a week, I would probably be blacklisted by her publicist, Leslie Sloan, and even maybe by the studio, because that's how it works in this industry. It's always the journalist's fault if something is not going well, or if a talent or an actor is put in a bad light, they blame it on the journalist. I've experienced that a few times before, and all my colleagues have had that same experience as well. I think every single one of my colleagues have been in a situation where either the studio or the publicist took their tape away, took their interview away after they finished the interview for no specific reason. They don't even have to give you a reason. But the thing is, they are putting up the camera gear and everything on location there. So then they own the contents on those tapes because they taped it on their video recorders or on their cameras. I remember I was interviewed by BBC talking about this like 6 months ago in the middle of the crazy whirlwind around that viral interview. And the BBC said that they always bring their own cameras, so no one can censor their interviews afterwards, which is great. But, most people like me or other entertainment reporters, a lot of them, especially international ones, are freelancers, and we don't have the means to bring our own camera crew. And they wouldn't allow us either. It's only if you have a big name, a huge publication in your back, that they would allow things like that. We are just really disposable, all of us international journalists. And you also see how a lot of these people are such kiss ass up to the people, the publicists, the studio. This whole industry is just such kiss ass to begin with, and everyone's kind of fake. And that's what I've been talking a lot about on my channel on YouTube as well. And I will also talk about that a lot here on my podcast. So as I said, I did post that interview in August on my YouTube channel, August of last year. That was just after It Ends With Us had premiered in theaters, and people had already started speculating if there was something going on between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively, why they were never in photos together, why they weren't promoting the movie together. There were rumors, and there had also been, I think at that point, there had been some articles out speculating that something was going on. I did not know about the feud that was going on the set at that time. I had no idea. I know people really, really wanted me to have an agenda or a hidden motive here for posting that interview, but I didn't really. I came back from Europe. I just had a long vacation, and I was invited to go to a screening of It Ends With Us. So I brought my partner, Magnus, who's also an entertainment reporter, who also have interviewed Blake Lively many times. And we went to see the movie, and I really didn't like it. I thought the movie, I remember coming out of the movie, and my first reaction was saying to Magnus, like, this feels like a movie about Blake Lively's hair. There was so much hair in the movie. Anyways, we also talked about how terrible that rooftop scene was. It was so cliche. And now, as we know, we've learned afterwards that Ryan Reynolds actually wrote that scene. But, anyways, back to my car ride home with Magnus, and I was like, oh my God, I had this awful interview with Blake Lively in 2016, and we talked about her, and he doesn't like her either. And I was like, should I just post that on YouTube? And he was like, yeah, why not? And because at that point, I was not longer doing these kind of interviews. It'd been a year since I did my last interview before that, which was actually with, I think, Robert De Niro and Kim Cattrall. They were my last interviews that I did in these kind of settings. And so I was like, I don't care now. I can post it. I don't care if people are canceling me, because I'm kind of have a foot out of Hollywood now. So I don't really care about being canceled. So then the next morning, I decided to put out the interview. And nothing really happened for the first like 2 days. And then all of a sudden, it started having a spike. And then this other journalist that I know sent me a clip from TikTok, someone making fun of Blake Lively and her outfits in the movie. And I was like, oh, that's funny. More people don't like Blake Lively. What I didn't know at that point was that there was this whole movement against her already happening, and people were reacting very badly or strongly to her promotion of the movie, which was about DV, as you know. And she just kind of kept talking about how you should wear your florals and bring your girlfriends, and at the same time selling her new hair products and also her booze, Betty Booze and Betty Buzz. So people were like, why don't you talk about the subject of the movie? So at that point, there was already a lot of negative reactions on social media. And then when I posted that interview, everything exploded. It was everywhere. My friends in Norway were like, my daughter showed me this on TikTok. I didn't even put it on TikTok myself. It ended up there. And they were like, everyone's talking about this interview and she was so rude to you. And my friend who was on vacation in Croatia, she was like, I was walking in front of these people from Australia. And they were like, have you heard that interview with Blake Lively when she's saying, like, congrats on your little bump? And she sent it to me. It was so funny. I was like, oh my God, this interview is everywhere. I did not expect that to happen at all. And the thing is, I did not expect people to actually reach out to me in support. Because before this, I've always experienced if a celebrity was not behaving very nicely or kind of came off as a little rude to me, people, not only the publicist or the studios, would blame it on me, but also the public. When I posted things on YouTube, they would be like, oh, it's the journalist. Because, a lot of people really love their celebrities and they don't want them to look bad. So as I said, was not expecting all the amazing support that I got. I got so many beautiful emails from people supporting me, saying, this has helped me. I'm so glad that you're exposing bullying like this. So yeah, that was a really big shock to me. And then Daily Mail contacted me and other outlets started contacting me, TMZ, everyone wanted an interview with me. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to say here? It felt really awkward for me being on the other side of things, because I am usually the one interviewing people, and then all of a sudden I was being interviewed myself about an interview that I did. And I didn't remember all the details from 8 years ago. It was over 8 years ago since I'd done the interview, but everyone was like, what did it feel like? And what were you thinking? There were so many stories. And then everything started kind of spinning out of control. There were all these conspiracy theories getting root on TikTok, on Instagram, and I completely lost control of the situation. And I was like, wow, now people are starting to make up their own theories about what happened. There were stories that I was told not to mention her pregnancy, pregnancy beforehand. There were even stories saying that I had gone up and touched her belly before the interview started. Yeah, people just love making up conspiracy theories. So I decided I'm going to go on YouTube myself and talk about what had happened so that I can clear up all misunderstandings about what happened before the camera started rolling. And before the camera started rolling, nothing had happened. I sat down and I told my name into the camera, which you do before you start doing these interviews. And that was it. Because, you have 5 minutes, sometimes four. This interview for me was supposed to be a double slot because I was doing an interview for a German TV show and a Norwegian TV show. So they had given me double time. They did cut the interview short, and you probably understand why if you watch the video. It is on my YouTube channel if you want to go and watch it if you haven't seen it yet. And it's called the Blake Lively interview that made me want to quit my job, which it did. Because when I left that room, I was like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. It was awful. And when things like that happen, you start looking inward. It's like, was it my fault? Did I say anything? Am I bad at my job? So, yeah. And that was, of course, another reason why I didn't want to post it, because I wasn't proud of the interview in any way. But anyway, so I started this new series on YouTube where I talked a lot about this interview at first, and then I started talking about my other experiences with other celebrities. So if you go back to my videos from October, November, there's a lot of my inside scoops from what it's like to interview celebrities. I also did some videos about my favorite actors to interview and the ones that I'm not so fond of. But anyways, I continued doing that, and then another bomb hit. On December 21st, I was in bed still, and my partner Magnus was reading New York Times, and I woke up and he's like, "Oh my God, you're in trouble." And I was like, "What? Why? What's happened?" And he's like, "I'm going to read this story for you." And he wrote the article, and he read the article from the New York Times called "We Can Bury Anyone." It was about how Blake Lively had been SH'd on the set of It Ends With Us, and how Justin Baldoni and Wayfair and his team had created a smear campaign against her as retaliation. And in the article, I was mentioned. There was a picture of me as well, saying that Kjersti Flå, the Norwegian reporter, it's not the first time that she has been linked to Melissa Nathan, who was the crisis PR manager that Justin Baldoni had hired. They mentioned that I also had posted an interview with Johnny Depp back in 2020 or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but it was when Johnny Depp was in the lawsuit with Amber Heard. And I had posted an old interview I had done with Johnny Depp. With no context, really. I just hashtagged it Justice for Johnny Depp. And that was the reason why they said that I had been working, or they insinuated very strongly that I had been working with Justin Baldoni's team and the Wayfarer team. So at that point, I went from being the reporter who exposed a bully to being a corrupt journalist who was willing to do anything for money, and I had no ethics, and it was horrible. I received so many hate mails from people. It was disturbing. I couldn't open my Instagram myself. I had to give my phone to Magnus to say, "Can you please just block these people? I don't want to see it." It was awful. It was during Christmas. As you know, this is when Blake Lively filed that CRD complaint, and it was Christmas time. So Justin Baldoni's team had no time to respond because the courts were closed. It was very well calculated from her team to do that just before Christmas. And of course, she ruined Justin Baldoni's Christmas and all his employees at Wayfarer's Christmas. But she also ruined my Christmas. It was awful. I felt terrible, and I felt I couldn't really defend myself. I went on my YouTube channel and I talked about it and said, I had nothing to do with this. But people didn't believe me. They were like, "Have you seen what he did to Blake Lively? It's so awful what he did to her. And you were a part of that. You were dragging down down another woman. You're a woman hater. I got so many awful, awful comments. And it was so heartbreaking for me because I always put ethics, journalism and ethics really high. And to see that New York Times did this, and I was the only person in that article that was mentioned that they did not contact for a comment. So they never reached out to me. They just insinuated that I had been a part of this horrific smear campaign, alleged horrific smear campaign against Blake Lively. So I reached out to New York Times myself and I said, hey, what's going on here? Why didn't you contact me? And this is not true. You should have asked me for a comment here. What is your, that's just like regular journalistic due diligence, that you do that. It's rule number 1 in journalism. You can't just report on something without checking the source. And they had my email. They already did an article about me a couple of months earlier, actually. They did a little profile on me in New York Times saying that she's the one calling out the bullies in Hollywood, which was a nice article, by the way. New York Times responded to me and said that, oh, we can't correct this. That's not possible. But we can add your statement in here saying that you had nothing to do with it. But everyone had already read the article by then, so it didn't make any difference. And the fact that they didn't want to correct it says a lot to me. They didn't want to take responsibility for spreading misinformation about me. And about, it's damaging for not only my career, but also for me personally, that people don't trust me. And being accused of lying is horrible. And for me, I always try to be as transparent as possible. And when you're being accused of something like that and you can't really come out and defend yourself, except going on my YouTube channel and say, hey, I didn't do it, that is just an awful feeling. Anyways, after a horrific Christmas, Justin Baldoni finally filed his counter lawsuit against Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, and he came with all the receipts. It was such a wonderful day for me because I feel like, okay, finally, if they see his receipts, they understand that I did not take part in this alleged smear campaign. And things started to shift, and it was such a great feeling. And yeah, I was so happy that day when I started reading everything. And the thing is, for me, because I knew what they said about me in that New York Times article wasn't true, I doubted a lot of the other stuff too in that article, because I was like, why, if they're trying to lie about me, what else is a lie in here? And now that we've seen the evidence, we understand that a lot of these text messages, all of them, were taken out of context and they were cherry picked to create a narrative that was pro Blake Lively. And as we know, New York Times never really reached out to Baldoni's team until, like, I don't think even 24 hours before they were actually publishing the article. And they ended up publishing the article before they actually said they were going to. Anyways, the narrative started to shift, but the traditional media did not shift the narrative. They kept pushing for Blake Lively's side, saying that, she was a victim. And even though Justin Baldoni's team kept coming out with more information, they even created this website where they published so many text messages and emails, and everyone who digged into it was more and more shocked. And we started understanding that Blake Lively's real motivation and end goal here was to take over the entire movie with the help from Ryan Reynolds, her husband. There was so much evidence proving that she had taken over every single department of the movie, from costume to music to even rewriting the script, or Ryan Reynolds rewriting the script, to the editing process. We learned that her version of the movie was the one that hit theaters, and Justin Baldoni, who was the director of the movie and the producer, he had not even seen the final product before the premiere. We also learned that Justin Baldoni was being sent into the basement with his family and friends at the premiere because Blake Lively did not allow him to appear at the same time as her on the red carpet. So he was shushed away as soon as she arrived and put in the basement, and they had to watch the movie in another theater. More and more of this information kept seeping out, and people started really turning against against Blake Lively for a reason. And that's also when I started doing daily updates about this drama on my YouTube channel. As I said many times, there's so many layers to this drama that I find interesting. The whole media aspect of it and how traditional media is still portraying Blake Lively as the victim here. And also the publicist world, the PR world, and how dirty everything is. And also the big egos, the narcissism, and how all this power play behind the scenes is playing out, not only from the actors themselves, like Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, but also their management teams, WME, which was representing Justin Baldoni as well, who fired him like 2 hours after this article was published. And as the days and weeks have gone by, there's a new story almost every single day. And everyone's been really kind of shocked by how Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds have been out in public so many times and just showing off on red carpets and pretending everything's fine, in contradiction to everything she was saying in the lawsuit against Justin Baldoni, that she was, mortified and she couldn't leave the house. She had anxiety and sleeping issues and all that. And she comes off as the complete opposite when you look at her and the way she behaves in public. At the same time, Justin Baldoni has kept quiet and just like been with his family and close friends around him in Hawaii. He has done one public post on Instagram since this happened, which was to say Happy Mother's Day to his wife and his mother. And while Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds keep pushing products every day, Blake Lively just released a new product from her hair care line, Blake Brown, which is a mist that you can buy on Target. And talk about irony, especially when she sued Justin Baldoni. For one of the things she sued him for was that he smelled her and said she smelled nice. And she said that that was very uncomfortable for her in her lawsuit, while he said what really happened, which we saw on video evidence, that she said, "Oh, I smell bad from my self-tan." And he was like, "No, you smell good." So yeah, anyways, now she's selling a mist because smell and scent is so important to her. But don't you dare tell anyone that she smells good. Another recent incident that happened, as you all know probably, is that Taylor Swift was dragged into this. She was dragged into this from the beginning when Blake Lively was bragging about her being with her the entire time of this shoot of the It Ends With Us. She was such a support to her, and she called her a dragon in an email threatening Justin Baldoni that if he didn't do what she said, she had dragons to back her up. Pointing at Taylor Swift. And it's been a little over a week now since we learned the news that Blake Lively had been blackmailing Taylor Swift. She had received no public support from her. And apparently, according to Justin Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, he had spoken to Taylor Swift's father, Scott Swift, who could tell him that Blake Lively had sent an email, or Blake Lively's lawyers had sent an email to Taylor Swift's lawyers saying that if she didn't support her publicly, she would leak 10 years of text messages and communication between them to the public or to the press. She had also allegedly asked Taylor or demanded that Taylor delete the text messages between them. It's quite funny because I'm thinking she was going to leak all the text messages, but before that, she was going to delete all the text messages between them. So I'm thinking she's probably going to leak all the text messages where Taylor Swift was talking about her exes or her current boyfriend, Travis Kelce, while Blake would, of course, cherry pick the text that she wanted to leak. And she would obviously not leak the text between her and Taylor, where they talked about things that could contradict things that she's been saying in her lawsuit. I mean, there's a reason why she wanted Taylor Swift to delete conversations between them. There's something in there that Justin Baldoni's team can use. Another bomb that we learned about recently is that Blake Lively's team filed a so-called sham lawsuit to get a subpoena to get hold of a phone that was owned by Jennifer Abel, who had left Joneswork, which was the company that represented Justin Baldoni, and her former boss, Steph Stephanie Jones had her phone that she took from her when she left the company. And it's been quite obvious so far that Stephanie Jones had a little peek at that phone to see what she could find on her former employee, because she did not want her to leave her company and start her own. And she was afraid that she was going to take clients with her. So she wanted to punish her ex-employee. So she found some text messages that she thought Blake Lively's team could find interesting. So she made a phone call to Leslie Sloan and told her about these text messages that ended up in the New York Times. And Leslie Sloan was thinking, oh, how can we get these text messages legally? Let's file a sham lawsuit so we can get a subpoena and get the phone legally. And that was the only phone that they subpoenaed. They didn't subpoena Stephanie Jones' phone or anyone else who'd been working with Justin Baldoni on the Wayfarer or the Wayfarer. It was the only phone that they wanted to get hold of, which is so obvious that Stephanie Jones had made that phone call or contacted Leslie Sloan to ask her or to tell her that she had this evidence. Also, before that subpoena was actually given to Stephanie Jones, Leslie Sloan had called Melissa Nathan to tell her that she had seen the text messages. Melissa Nathan was working for TAG, which was the PR crisis management team that Justin Baldoni had hired when things started looking bad for him and he started learning that Blake Lively was after him. When this news broke, it was clear that Justin Baldoni's lawyer didn't even know about this. And Blake Lively's team responded that this is normal procedure, that these things are happening all the time, that people file sham lawsuits against 10 anonymous people, because that's what they did. They filed a lawsuit against 10 unknown people because they didn't know what they were actually looking for. They just knew that people had been creating a smear campaign against Blake Lively, and they were trying to find out who and what was who was involved. So they filed it against unknown people. And the day before that article was published in the New York Times, that lawsuit was just like canceled. They just withdraw the whole lawsuit. So it was clear that the only reason why they had filed that through their company called Van Zandt, which was this really shady company owned by Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, that the only reason why they did that was to get hold of that phone. And it's been recent discovery now that Stephanie Jones had actually had access to Jennifer Abel's iCloud until recently and been snooping around there. So there's so much development in this story all the time. Okay, so I'm going to round this up now. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my first episode of Flaawsome Talk. I'm going to do this podcast every week, every Friday, and I'm going to do a little recap of the week so you know what's going on with this case and also other things happening in Hollywood. And sometimes I'll throw in some personal experiences I had with these people. And of course, please contact me, flawsometalk@gmail.com, if you have anything you want to share with me or you want me to talk about. I am also, as I said, on YouTube. So you can also comment there or send me a DM on my Instagram @KjerstiFlå. And yeah, thanks for listening and have a wonderful weekend. Bye.